All right, guys, good morning again. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here, but more specifically to introduce our next speaker. She is absolutely someone that I aspire to and has brought a wealth of knowledge and insight, not only to USDA, but looking at how we're engaging across the public. So good morning, all. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Gloria Montano Greene is a 2-decade veteran of the federal service, but brings a lifetime commitment to public service, mentoring, and civic engagement. Deputy Undersecretary Montano Greene brings her experience, knowledge, and most importantly, her passion to USDA to assist NRCS, our Farm PAC, and more specifically, the Department of Agriculture in implementing one of the most impactful pieces of legislation in recent history, the Inflation Reduction Act. When I was asked to be able to introduce our illustrious Deputy Undersecretary, I did not want to simply read the biography or list out her accomplishments, but I wanted to speak more personally and passionately to you all to be able to convey the deep admiration and appreciation that I have for her, as well as now being able to provide with you the knowledge and the assurance that our Deputy Undersecretary Greene is working every day to ensure that your needs are met, and more importantly, that your rights are respected and your voices are heard. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure and my privilege to be able to bring up our friend and our advocate, our own Deputy Undersecretary Montano Greene.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Oh, how's that? I fixed the button. Thank you very much. Thank you, Casey, for those comments. I also want to thank Delaware for lending Casey to the national office last year to make sure that some of the infrastructure we set up for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accountability included local voices, regional voices, as she helped set up that infrastructure and got to work a lot with her last summer. As Casey shared, my name is Gloria Montano Greene. I'm the Deputy Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation. That's a lot. And you've also been hearing, thank you, Secretary Skuse, for the time this morning, for getting to have some great conversations. But you've also heard the Department of Agriculture here, USDA, you have local agriculture, and the agencies. Within the Department of Agriculture, there's a huge responsibility of all the work that needs to be implemented throughout the country and the territories to be able to support agriculture, food security, forest service, research, and more. Farm production and conservation, the area I get to work on, is the farmer-facing part of USDA. We're a Farm Service Agency, which you heard about earlier, Natural Resource Conservation Services, Risk Management Agency, for those of you who have crop insurance, it's that public-private partnership that we engage with, and then we have one more to do operations and administrative work, a business center. There are 2,900 offices across the country, more than 20,000 people to serve, and we're hiring. Wear all the yellow jackets, and there's more yellow sweaters across the room and the blue jackets. Think about us as opportunities because we get to serve, and that's one of the beautiful things. You heard a little bit about me from my bio with Casey, but in rooms like this, I want to also just make sure of, you know, you kind of wonder, well, who's this talking? It's just another head, and like, well, what do they come from, and do they understand the experiences, and what are their informed experiences to be able to move forward? I was appointed by the Biden-Harris administration in February of 21 to serve the president at U.S. Department of Agriculture and Secretary Tom Vilsack. I am a first. It's kind of nice to be in the first state at the first ever Black Farmers Conference. I understand what it means to be a first. I'm a first generation U.S. citizen. I'm a first generation high school graduate, a first generation college graduate. When I was the state executive director of Arizona, I was the first female ever to serve in that role, and ended up being the first Latina. And I'm currently the first Latina within the Undersecretary's office to serve in this capacity. And like many of you that are doing this for the first time, doing it for the first time is scary, because you are breaking a system that knows it needs to include you, but doesn't know how to include you sometimes. And not breaking a system, improving a system, I should say. So you guys did a first conference. Thank you for doing this, and hopefully it is not the last, and I'm sure there'll be more, because there's now more questions to ask of how do we gather, how do we share, how do we inform. But it's scary being the first, because you probably thought, we're going to spend all this time creating this conference and we don't know if anyone's going to show. And we don't know if folks are going to critique what they had in results. You were already victorious in organizing yourselves. You have the Secretary of Agriculture, who's been giving his entire morning here, and it's in the middle of harvest season. Many of you are here in the middle of harvest season, and you know the important work that it needs to be able to move forward, to be able to talk, to share, to learn, and then to be able to say, are there things that we need to advocate for? Are there items I need to enroll in? Or do I need to do a farm demonstration to learn more projects? So I share with you that I'm a first, because that's kind of the North Star, that everything that passes through my desk and through those areas that I work on, there's a saying in Spanish, dime con quién andas, te diré quién eres. Tell me who you're hanging out with and it'll tell me who you are. And I kind of wondered, why would the Secretary of Agriculture ask the President to, add me to his team? But he's always open to being, how do we move forward? How do we think about new opportunities? And how do we think about different parts of the team and the voices to be able to move forward? So those are experiences that I move. At the Department of Agriculture, we have a lot of things that are pretty important, and our priorities in our strategic plan that we laid out. Some of them were discussed in the previous presentation, so I might not go into deep programs, but I do want to make sure to highlight things that are changes and improvements in ways that we're addressing. For my area, we have to work a lot on climate smart agriculture. There's a lot of increased disasters. I know that there's been many disaster declarations that we've had to do here in Delaware. But that also means it's also some change in climate. How do we help provide those tools to be able to do climate change mitigation and to provide resiliency to farmers that need that support as they're preparing for that next? Equity. And equity means so many things. But it means we have to look around and say, who have we been serving? Let's keep serving them. And who have we not served? And how do we serve those who have not come in? We call them a lot the new customers, the non-customers, but some of it is barriers in programs, some of it's barriers in trust, some of it's barriers in knowledge, some of it's because government can be complicated and language can be complicated, but at the end of the day, it's how do I help my farm? How do I keep farming? How do I keep growing into farm? How do I convince the next generation to come in? And how do we help translate those? Employee engagement. I'm a firm believer, policy's great, programs are great, but you can't do any of that without people. So if you're not thinking about that engagement and those movements, that's us. And then the market. How do we think about changing the markets? We all understood during the pandemic, we all understood before the pandemic that our food system was delicate. The pandemic shined a greater light on that. We can't go back to the same ways. We need to think about those local food investments. How are we thinking about those local markets and how are we supporting those regionally? Well, I don't get to do that directly in mine. I get to support that within the department. One of the grants and the project funding is coming through Delaware to be able to implement. We need to make sure we have local support to be able to do processing, market development, and regional food structures. So it's not just shipping, and how we actually focus on small farmers, middle farmers, and all of agriculture. So those are the things we're working on. FPAC, if the secretary has been giving a talk across the country, and if you haven't seen it, I hope you get to see it or look online for his speech. But really the investment that we need to be making is we can't keep doing agriculture the same way we were. We know the majority of you probably have a income off the farm to be able to support your livelihood on the farm. We know you're doing agriculture as a love, but it's also a business. We know that you also understand it as a mission, like a public service. And all the young folks are thinking about it, and they hear the hard stories, and it's like, it's still the most exciting thing. I was talking to your new acting state con for Delaware right now, and he said, the greatest thing we need is an 1890 intern. He was like, it was the coolest thing to be outside and during the day, and I was like, this is the life that I'm gonna have. And now he's, serving as the acting state con here in Delaware. So we've been making some changes at USDA. I'm going to share with you changes that you should be paying attention to, and we know we also have a lot more changes to do. There's a lot more barriers to remove and a lot more access we need to go, but we have to have a starting point. And change takes time, and a lot of times we have to move at the speed of trust. That's my background knowledge from past work. And I can have a lot of North Stars and where I move, but I also know that ultimately trust might not be with me. Trust might be with the university. Trust might be with the State Department of Agriculture. Trust might be with your neighboring farmer. Trust might be at the USDA office. It's okay, as long as you stop and ask questions as you as a farmer to say, if I'm having issues on financing, if I'm having issues on pest control, if I'm having issues on soil health, if I'm having issues on water management, if I'm having whatever it is, just think you have a resource at the USDA that we can find for you. We've been doing a lot of investments at USDA. Some of it's based on laws that we've had, the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are all laws, and they give us guidance from Congress, but ultimately we still have to design the programs and implement them, and to be able to say, what can they do? Some of them are to expand markets, to invest in local and regional foods. We've also had this one called the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodity, in which we know that there's a whole push for farming and agriculture to better think about how they're looking at climate change across their entire supply chain. But if we're not coming in with what is most fundamental at FPAC, which is incentive and voluntary-based support, we're not going to see those changes. So we announced the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities last year. In that announcement, we said, we want to see how you can show up for climate smart commodities, and we want to show up how you can show up with equity. When we put out that funding announcement for a grant, and it is a way we had to distribute it through a grant, we weighed that you had to have both present to be able to have an understanding. Because if we're not thinking about equity, and equity being the size of your farm, what you grow, race, gender, ethnicity, the various levels of equity, we're not going to be able to be there. So those Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, we announced $3 billion, 141 projects. Delaware is definitely represented. I understand Delaware might be having a transition in one of their grants, so to be actually a lead out of the University of Delaware. And it's supposed to be farmer-led. Even though universities are involved, it is applied research. That is one of the examples of how you can actually live both priorities at the same time. Climate smart work and equity work. We're also doing equity quite intensely. For the first time, U.S. Department of Agriculture has an equity commission. And you can say, well, commissions come and go. Commissions are kind of based on like what's happening here. Everybody that showed up cares. And the Equity Commission is part of a designated individuals that report to the Secretary and have a robust set of proposals on how they can improve equity. And they have recommendations. They've been working with us very intensely every month for the last 2.5 years on progress they want to see, not just names, not just words on a paper. How we continue to implement recommendations that they have. For me, on the inside, I get to track it. So I ask every one of my agencies each month, what are we doing? What are the barriers? What do I need to help you remove? How far can we go? And if it's a legislative fix, maybe we can't do it. But for you, I would recommend looking at the Equity Commission recommendations that will be posted soon. They just voted a couple weeks ago on dozens of recommendations. That's a roadmap of path of access. Some of it's farm worker access, some of it's small farmers access, some of it's underserved communities that need to show up better, some of it's program changes that we need to be designing at USDA. On that board and on that commission are individuals that have been some of the strongest critics of USDA in its history. So we are open to criticism, because if you're not willing to hear it, then you're not willing to make some of those changes. So I would say that those commission recommendations look at decades worth of recommendations that have happened, why USDA didn't move forward, and put some language in forth. The Equity Commission is one part of the equity items. We also have a robust set of equity action plans. We've layered them against our work plans so that they can actually better think about what we need to implement and how we need to make changes. A lot of my career, I've had a very diverse career. It's really been, how do you make sure that institutions, governments are accessible? And some of that's on the outside coming in, some of that's from the inside going out, and sometimes if we can both pull at the same time, we can make more change. I want to talk about a few of the things that I want to make sure is on your guys' respective radar of changes we've made and changes that we have thought about or that we need to continue to do more. A Farm Service Agency was mentioned earlier, the Non-Insured Assistance Program. That's kind of a risk management tool. It has always been almost waived fee to be able to sign up for that, but you had to enroll into it. If you have a CCC 860 sign that says you are among the designated socially disadvantaged, and that's a congressional designation in the Farm Bill, not my preferred choice of words, but that is the designation in the statute, that you are already enrolled into that. We announced that in January to remove one barrier. We were seeing a low enrollment of a risk management tool when we were seeing a high increase of disaster. We weren't necessarily able to provide some of those resources. So if you have that file on form at FSA, you are enrolled into it. We know that NAP is still complicated. It's complicated to be able to claim your money. We are working on ways to be able to streamline and reduce that burden. But the biggest is, if you are a farmer and you do not have a relationship with FSA, or you're thinking about being a farmer, begin a relationship with FSA. That is a fundamental base thing to have as a farm record, so you can have access to some of these programs. And in case a disaster hits, and I'm hoping one doesn't, that there's a tool for you. Ag financing is a large issue for us. For the entire mission area, we've decided without ag financing, we can't actually strengthen agriculture. So it's been front and center on what do we do to improve. We have a couple things in front of us. The Inflation Reduction Act provided us $3 billion to be able to address distressed borrowers. And Congress gave us a little bit of designation and expectations to be able to go forward. We've been releasing that money to direct and guaranteed UFSA farm borrowers immediately. 2 months after passage, we paid about $800 million of individuals that were on the brink of bankruptcy to be able to bring them back. Our immediate North Star and our immediate North push was, how do we make sure to keep agriculture, keep farmers farming, and to make sure that we are providing a most viable path forward. If you have a USDA loan, farm loan, direct or guaranteed, and you haven't received a payment, but you might have had some issues on your having some concerns about making your current payment, talk to your FSA officer, or just go on to our website. If you Google, I'm not going to give you the website, but if you Google Farm Service Agency section 22006, there are ways for you to be able to find a way to have a better loan servicing or some financial support and relief for that if you are a distressed borrower. While we have the Inflation Reduction Act, we know that's just a one-time deal that Congress gave us. We got to make a lot of changes, that ag financing. We have some history. And we have to acknowledge that history, and we have to address that past. So one of the things we've done is we reduced the loan application. It's now 13 pages. It used to be 30 pages. I know that's still a lot, but we are working on how we improve it. We're working on expediting that timeline of approval, because we know that that's also a pressure point. And we're also having a robust conversation and doing some staff training that we are preparing on what does it mean to understand all the tools available. And not that everything's 100% yes, but we need to work towards yes a lot more on our ag financing. We have proposals in front of Congress right now that hopefully they can give us in the fiscal year 24 budget to actually give us a little bit more flexibility so we can be more farmer ag financing friendly versus ag financing only. And then the other is the Inflation Reduction Act. You heard a really great representation on the Natural Resource Conservation Services. Well, Congress just gave us $19.5 billion at NRCS. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is. What that ultimately means is investment in your farm, investments in entire landscapes and communities, in water preservations, in land saving to make sure land does not necessarily can go into easements and not transition into private. I think that's many of your thoughts as well. I want to stay in ag, but it's also, I shake my head every time you see one less farm, one less field, and one more development, right? So we have some tools there. NRCS has a goal to be able to implement this aggressive program. But it's not just to roll it out. We have an exact charge to every state, and Delaware is definitely one of them, is we need to make sure we're having new customers. We know that there are a lot of people that haven't touched us. We know that a lot of people that haven't come to us because maybe some family history from 15, 20 years ago that said, I don't know about that. Or I went there and they always said no. We kind of sometimes always said no because we ran out of money. We actually have money now. It's an oversubscribed program, but we have dollars to be able to invest it. So if you have any concern about your farm, to be able to layer onto it, we have had a really robust way that we're thinking about small farmers, small farms, micro farms, and urban farms. And we talked about urban ag in the earlier panel, but I just want to share, we're not defining urban agriculture based on the population of a community. We're defining urban ag to be able to think like it's not the traditional, and I'm from Arizona, so like you got, hundreds of acres in a field, in a square. It's understanding that you can grow an entire, farmer's market routine in a potential half acre, 2 acre, 3 acre, and some folks I've been visiting in backyards, right, to be able to move forward. So we've been doing a lot of education to our staff of where we do exist and where those resources do exist within our programs. We've been investing in urban agriculture conservationists and urban ag FSA staff to specifically think about the needs of an urban agriculture farmer. And it's been showing up in different ways across the country. So if you have previously said, well, I'm a farmer in this part of Delaware and it's never serviced me at NRCS, give us a time. Again, knock on the door. If you said, I'm a farmer, my neighbor went to FSA and they said, I don't know, that program didn't exist because I don't have base acres. Don't take that story anymore. Knock on the door at FSA. There are office hours that are going to be held one-on-ones tomorrow. Take the time to have those conversations. We are working to remove barriers on our programs that have been there. We have a lot more work to do. That comes from feedback from you all, that we hear from your state conservationist and your state executive director that says, this program doesn't work. So the more you talk, the more you use your voice, the more you share, you might get frustrated because of the time it takes, but we all are still making changes as we can. And finally, even though it doesn't get talked about too much, I want to talk about 3 things more. Is that okay? Okay. Risk Management Agency, if you're a crop insurance provider, we have made sure that the crop insurance has micro farm availability. The majority of farms being less than 5 acres in Delaware, I think the whole farm and the micro farm and crop insurance work is something, it's a new item that we've rolled out, and it should be something to be available to you. We are hiring. There's many youth here, and there's many generations of agriculture interests. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, what you eat and what you wear, it's all connected to agriculture, right? So I would think about going into farming, if you're like, maybe farming isn't for me, but doing advising, doing plant health, doing seed health, get into the career. It's a domestic job growth that always grows, and I wish somebody would have told me that when I was college, and I probably wouldn't have been lost for about 10 years. But there are opportunities. We have pathways, we have internships, we are hiring constantly across all departments. If you care about entomology, you care about soil health, you care about research, you care about loan servicing, you care about customer service across the counter, we are here. And I understand this generation, more so than any other generation, is public service oriented. So have those conversations with your family members. I mentioned earlier that we all move at the speed of trust. We've done a lot of great changes. The leader of NRCS is Terry Cosby. He started as an 1890 intern. 44 years later, he's a chief. The head of Farm Service Agency spent his entire career on the outside, working with Intertribal Ag Council, trying to change FSA ag financing on the outside. He's now the head of FSA. And the head of Risk Management Agency is a 25-year career FSA individual. When she left FSA, decided to work in a consulting group on how you increase tribal communities' enrollment into crop insurance, and now is the head of Risk Management Agency. These are the individuals that I lean into to say, are we doing enough? Are we thinking about new customers? And what can we do to remove barriers? So I invite you to continue to work with us, to collaborate with us, to critique us, and to help us work towards solutions. Thank you all for having this first conference, and I know it won't be the last. I'm sorry. I have one more, if I can just say. I'm just sorry. Right? I did share. We have a history at USDA of discrimination. And there is a program out there, and I know that there's going to be conversations tomorrow on it, but I do want to make sure that while you highlight it, and it's on two different points, so it's on day 1 and day 2. We are currently implementing, based on the Inflation Reduction Act, we received $2.1 billion to implement the Discrimination Financial Assistance Program for individuals who have been discriminated by USDA through their ag financing prior to January of 2021. Congress said that that it needed to be implemented by a non-government entity, which means that FSA, NRCS could not administer it. They had to contract another party. That application is live. It is live through the applications are due January 13th, 2024. If you know anyone who feels that they have been discriminated against prior to January 2021 due to ag financing, they should apply or look into the program. There'll be more of a conversation tomorrow, but it is, I'm going to get the website so I don't mess it up for you. It is 22007apply.gov. And I'm going to just ask that you might see that application and say it's 40 pages, Gloria. I thought you said you were going to remove barriers. Don't get intimidated by the application. It is not a prescriptive application. It's allowing individuals to share their experiences and to share the discrimination, which might not be documented fully on paper. So we can be a little bit more understanding and aware of what needs to be understood. And I know there will be more conversation tomorrow, but that's a very important part. It's an important part to move forward, to be able to recognize that and to make that payment. Thank you.